I took a lot of that also because I thought the industry afterwards, like non-stop in Africa, wherever I was, seeing how they were keep pushing their quick and dirty solution rather than to look at something alternative. And basically, giving death threats. I mean, I got death threats from the industry for promoting biocontrol. But that was the same for Vandenbosch, that's the same for almost everybody in biocontrol. The industry is ruthless.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from entomologist Hans Herren, who famously won the 1995 World Food Prize for successfully controlling the Cassava Mealybug throughout Africa by releasing a parasitic wasp that is specific to that pest. This means of pest control, using a living organism to control a pest, is called biocontrol. At the time, 50% of the caloric intake in parts of Africa was coming from cassava, and the mealybug was devastating over 80% of the crop in some areas. Before Hans and his team's biocontrol efforts, governments were using widespread pesticide sprays to control the cassava mealybug. Hans and his team were able to put a stop to that government spray program, and since that time, Hans has become a strong voice for organic agriculture and environmental protections across the globe. He's a continuous advocate for a world food system that does not need chemical interventions. Hans was featured in the second session of our 2024 symposium, In Defense of Biology. Tickets are still available to watch the recordings if you missed it, so you can watch the preview and find out all the details by visiting realorganicproject.org.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm pleased to be talking with Hans Herren. Hans, we've been talking a lot today, so I'm actually going to ask you to repeat a few of the stories you told because I think that they should be shared if you're willing. Hans won the Right Livelihood Award and the World Food Prize, basically, I think both for a big project that you were working on in Africa. And it's the first time I learned the details of it today. It's quite amazing. It was using beneficial insects on a continent-wide scale. So pretty amazing. So could you tell me, well, first, how did you come to become an entomologist? When did that develop for you as a passion?
Yeah, anyway, thank you for the interview, Dave. Yeah, it goes back to when I grew up on our tobacco farm in Switzerland near Lake Geneva, where we did a lot of spraying slowly. I was about like 14, 15 and working on the farm, during holidays. And so I realized, sort of how we went on that farm from doing things the natural way to totally moving into chemicals. And that was in the sort of late 50s, early, during the 60s. And when my father sort of really got into using chemicals, I'm not sure exactly why he switched, but I think it was advice of all kind of extension people who came and told him that he can do things better and cheaper than manual labor. We had quite a bit of manual labor to weed the fields of not only tobacco, but we grew potatoes and wheat. And a good example was the wheat when we had winter wheat into which we were sowing clover. And then as soon as the wheat was mown and harvested, clover will grow, and we had about 3 cuts of clover which were then dried for cattle food. We didn't have any animals ourselves, but that sort of intercropping in the wheat allowed us to stock up the land with nitrogen fertilizer. And after the wheat, we usually planted tobacco, who is actually quite demanding in terms of nitrogen. So we had a natural system going on, but that all was then put away and say, okay, why don't we use now herbicides to prepare before preparing the land for sowing our wheat, and then basically no more intercropping with clover. But what's the problem? I mean, you just apply nitrogen. So we were out there with the tractor, instead of having the natural fertilizer, using synthetic fertilizer. And with time, we then also used more fungicides on the wheat, and in particular in potatoes, also a lot of fungicide spraying, copper at that time, and other organic fungicides. And then in tobacco, all of a sudden we had this major problem with a pathogen, a mildew, who basically 1 year just took all the yield down. Basically the whole crop was gone. Totally unexpected, was imported. I don't remember now from where it came from, but all of a sudden all the tobacco farmer in that area, the lower Rhone Valley, lost all their crop. And so I remember going to the Paris agricultural show, where my father bought one of these special tractor which goes over the row. And there I was the next year spraying a lot of fungicide onto tobacco to basically make sure we have a harvest. And that went on until basically I went away from the farm.
Was your family enthusiastic about this change? I also grew up on a farm. Also, it was as the chemicals were coming in, and was this seen as this is good, this is progress, things work better?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the thing. And again, we were dependent on a lot of foreign labor in Switzerland, not enough people. So we had people from Italy, laborers, they came for 9 months, helping with the planting and the harvest. And so using chemicals made that for a while at least, there was reduced need for hand weeding, in particular the weeding part, because we sprayed a lot of herbicides also in addition to all the other chemicals. And yeah, it was seen as this is the way we do agriculture now. It's modern. Another time, maybe very few people, that was 60s, were talking about organic, maybe some farmers, some vegetable farmers, in particular Rudolf Steiner and the biodynamic folks. I mean, they were there already doing their thing, but that was not something which was done on large farm, and it was fairly large farm, the one we had. Again, it was owned by a cigarette company, the land and basically all the buildings, everything. My father was the manager of that farm. And they had a couple of farms, and both in the same region were growing mostly tobacco, but in a rotation with potato and wheat. So that was the system. Quite simple. And I guess it was quite efficient, at least for a while, until we had to do more and more spraying, because at the beginning it was a little bit, but then, we got into this, how you call that, spiral of more and more and more, and also, again, more toxic chemicals. And I think I'm even paying the price today with handling those pesticides in a very casual manner. Yeah. So I think looking back, we were doing things like we should have known a lot better. But at the time, chemicals were seen as almost like a medicine. Yeah. And I know that's a little bit what I encountered in Africa, all those chemicals, the little bottles, this medicine for the plants and for the ground and all this. So people are very confident that it's actually not a problem.
Right. So when did it first occur to you that it might be a problem, or there might be a different way?
I think it occurred when we were getting into this spiral of more and more and more. And it wasn't doing anything anymore, so we were looking for other products. And that's when actually I decided to go and study agriculture. I always wanted to do something different, go away from the farm. It wasn't really my idea to stay on a farm and be a farmer, until I realized that there is a potential there to do things differently. And so I had to do a lot of catching up. because I went to primary and then I sort of stopped. I was figuring out what do I do now. In Switzerland, we do a lot of apprenticeship. So I always thought maybe a mechanic or something like that, but not really farming until I decided maybe there is something here. We could look into it more closely. So I catching up. I went to agricultural school with practical. It was a 2-year theoretical and practical course. So I have a diploma, a farmer's diploma. But again, even there in that agricultural school, there wasn't any talk of alternative to chemicals. It was all about, we learned all about the chemicals and how the compositions and how they work and all this. But there wasn't really at that time any discussion of doing it differently in those agricultural schools, which almost every canton in Switzerland had one, if not two. That's where farmers went and learned the trade. So you can see that on the other end, the people who tried to do things differently were very few and looked at as a bit on the off side of things. In particular, when you look at the biodynamic, a lot of people just shaking their heads. But I was wondering, but there's got to be something there. And that's why eventually when I went to the ETH in Zurich to get my diploma as agronomist, that's the title, I tried to look at alternatives. And so in agronomy per se, very, very conventional. And that's why actually I moved into entomology, because there was a professor, Professor De Lucchi. And so he was an IPM and biocontrol guy. And we really connected very quickly. And I decided to move more into entomology because there was an alternative to all these pesticides. And so I specialized eventually in biological control, although not in agriculture, but on a forest insect, a cyclical insect which destroys the large trees in the whole Alps, from France all the way to past Austria, and attacks the large tree sort of with a cycle of 10 to 12 years. A lot of them, they will disappear, they come back, and that has been studied for the past 100 years. I think we found the solution why that cycle, but that was really, I think, a big question for many, many years.
So it was not in commercial agriculture that you first got to apply some of the principles that you learned. It was in natural systems.
That's right. Yeah. So basically, I did a manipulation in one of the valleys in the Alps, where actually I put out hosts. People are again thinking this guy is crazy, making the problem worse. But actually, I tried to maintain a population of beneficial in the lower part of the cycle, so that they don't really almost fall out. They never fell out of the system totally, all these natural enemies, but they became so few you could hardly find one. You had to cut down a big large tree to find a few larvae, and then of them maybe one or two parasitized. And so I said, if we don't let them go that low, then they will keep them down, because they won't need 5-6 years to catch up with the host again. And it actually worked. It's a very interesting, but again, it's totally unpractical to do this on that scale. But I think it was more to understand the ecology of these insects and see how they sort of, the parasite is catching up with the host, and why also most of the time the host will escape the natural enemy, because natural enemy can't build up its population fast enough compared to the host. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of good theoretical knowledge gained through my PhD, but many other colleagues' PhDs in that valley.
Yeah. So when did you take it to agriculture?
So I already took it to agriculture after my studies were done. I got a PhD, and after the postdoc, which I did at UC Berkeley with Professor Van den Bosch. And that's when we went to studied. Actually, what I did there on the postdoc was study cabbage aphids. And they also have the tendency of getting out of control of their own natural enemies. But that was mostly due to the fact that the natural parasitoids of the cabbage aphid has its own enemies. And so they're called the hyperparasitoids. And that actually, we could see how they slow down the progression of the main parasitoid. And again, that makes sense in a system where you want a certain level of equilibrium, but that equilibrium wasn't good enough for the people who were growing cabbage. There were still too many aphids left. That was good for the parasitoid, because then they didn't have to search that long, they didn't fall out of the system. But again, so we had a problem there. And so it was important to study, the impact of the hyperparasitoid on the parasitoids and on the host. But that was the work I did during my postdoc. And then only after that, I went into maybe not horticultural crops or vegetable crops, but then into really agriculture.
We experienced that problem of hyperparasites parasitizing our parasites. So for aphids, we would release Aphidius urvi, and somebody was starting to parasitize the Aphidius, and it caused a tremendous problem for us because they always work so well. We didn't even worry about it. See a few aphids, you release these guys, and then it didn't work. Yeah.
But that's why also, when you do classical biocontrol, when you go into a new area, you want to make sure that you take only the parasitoids and don't take pupae where you don't know what's inside. So we actually have to work with adults, which can be separated out, and start culture of pure parasitoids without the hyperparasitoids. And I think in many biocontrol programs, they didn't pay attention to that. They said, all took all this nice pupae, and maybe, 20, 30, 40% were probably attacked by hyperparasitoid.
Yeah.
And so they were released.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Yeah. Releasing the problem as well as the solution.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So was it after that you went to Africa?
Yeah, that was after my postdoc in Berkeley.
Yeah.
I needed a job. I had to move on.
Yeah. Before you go, the guy you studied with, Van der Bosch?
Yeah, Robert Van den Bosch, or Van.
Van den Bosch.
Van den Bosch.
Okay.
He was known as Van.
Okay.
He was a very interesting character, very driven, very I like a guy which people really could connect to, and again, driven. He was driven by biocontrol. He was really a biocontrol person, but also by the fact that he really had on his radar the industry who was pushing the other way all the time. And he was working in a team of IPM people like Carl Hoffaker, and Ken Hagen. These were all the big figures here in Paul de Bach. So these were the big figures in biocontrol and IPM here in California. But they had really colleagues like in Switzerland, my professor De Lucchi, who was a good friend of them, and they had many. So there was sort of a network of biocontrol people. But Van was the guy who was already upfront and taking on the industry. He had a job at the university. He didn't have to worry too much about them. I guess he could do whatever he wanted. And he had a lot of very good students, which a lot of colleagues of mine who studied with him and with his colleagues at the biocontrol lab of the University of California in Berkeley.
But you said actually, he came out with a great book that was kind of a classic book. What was it called?
Yeah, it was called The Pesticide Conspiracy.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, the title says it all.
Yeah.
And this is by Robert Van den Bosch. It was re-edited with a foreword by Andy Gutierrez, who was also, or became in to UC Berkeley, to the biocontrol lab. while Van den Bosch was still there, but in these later days. So he was also very driven. He was basically tried to follow a little bit in the shoes of Van den Bosch. And I took a lot of that also because I thought the industry afterwards, like non-stop in Africa, wherever I was, seeing how they were keep pushing their quick and dirty solution rather than to look at something alternative. And basically, giving death threats. I mean, I got death threats from the industry for promoting biocontrol. But that was the same for Van den Bosch, that's the same for almost everybody in biocontrol. The industry is ruthless.
Yeah, ruthless. You said he was under a lot of pressure when he put out that book, that he felt that pressure.
He felt that pressure, I'm sure, yeah.
Well, I'm sure you felt it too if you're getting death threats.
Yeah, but I just say, well, just try. I'm not going to give up or give in.
Yeah.
Just let's do what needs to be done. And I think that what helps is when you have a success, if you can show it works. Because all of a sudden, a few people will join. And then you get enough momentum. And what we managed with the project in Africa on the Cassava Mealybug and the green mite and a few others, we're able to show that it works.
Yeah.
And then you can show that it works for the long term. It works for the benefit of the farmers, of the consumers at the end of the day. And so you don't have to spend, like in Africa, government don't have any money usually. So it's all funded with foreign aid. I mean, most of the pesticides used even today against locusts are all paid by foreign aid agencies. And so that money could be actually used for something else.
Yeah.
And we showed that it can be done.
Yeah. And it's a very serious battle going on for the future of agriculture.
Yeah.
And they're not fooling around.
Oh, no, I mean, we're a long ways of winning that battle because when you look at what happened in the last cycle of locust control, for example, in Africa, clearly the boat was missed. We don't know if it's on purpose or not, but there is a system set up to do the monitoring of these locusts and try to get them early in their area of recession using biological products. And one of them I was very much involved in developing is green mussel. It's a fungus which we found, or my team found, in Niger, and attacking locusts. So that fungus can be produced commercially. It can be sprayed onto locusts on hopper bands before these hoppers actually all take off. And within a few days, they're all dead. So that when we show this, it works. Even the FAO has participated in the experiment in Sudan, for example, and in West Africa also, in Niger, in Mali, and they know it works. But again, why are we not using this big time before we have swarms? I was involved in an additional product while not at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, where we developed the green mussel, which was picked up eventually by a company in South Africa, which produces commercially. But at the International Center of Insect Physiology and Ecology, where I became the director when I finished my work at IITA, and there we developed a pheromone which mimics what the locusts do among themselves to give a signal. Now we're going to change and become gregarious, or no, we're going to change back and become solitary. And so we found these different pheromones, synthesized them, very cheap product, very simple to do, and you could actually spray those hopper bands with the fungus, which will kill them, but it will also at the same time make sure none is flying away into a new field, multiply very quickly, and become these big swarms we know. So actually by combining the two products, you could really control locusts very cheaply, very environmentally safe, and also for people. I mean, all these products are usually not even a problem for health, for people, for birds, for nobody, except for the locusts. Yeah. But It's not being used as it could have been, because nobody makes a lot of money with these things.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to Africa, to the project that you were recruited on. And can you set the stage for us by explaining what was going on with the cassava crop? What was the impact of cassava on Africa? Why was it important? And what was happening? What did you come in on?
So cassava, for the ones who don't know, it's tapioca. You all know tapioca starch, right? So that's cassava. Basically the starch of the root, which is be processed into tapioca. It's also known as yuca in Spanish or Portuguese. So cassava was brought to Africa by the Portuguese way back when the Portuguese were going back and forth to Brazil, and that plant has originated in the Amazon. So it's actually from the Amazon, and then it spread further north up to Mexico, further south all the way down to Paraguay. But the main area of origin of cassava is actually Brazil and the Amazon region. And from there it was carried to Africa because the people realized quite quickly that this is a very interesting crop. It's multiplied vegetatively, so a piece of the stem. You take a little cutting, maybe 1 foot long or less, put it in the ground, and you can walk away and come back 8 months later and you're gonna have a number of big starchy roots. And so cassava was promoted in Africa by the colonial powers because it allowed the colonial powers to take the people, the men in particular, away from the farms to work in the plantation of cocoa, palm oil, what else they were growing? Big, the cash crops. While back home, there was nobody for farming. Okay, there were the women there, but basically there was always something to eat on the farm, even if the farmer wasn't there all the time. So it spread very quickly throughout Africa as sort of the main staple, replacing yam, this Korea, not the yam which people here in the US think is yam, but is actually sweet potato. But the yam is also a big root, very common at least in West Africa, in the more humid tropics. So together, maybe pushing away a bit of the yam, cassava took over everywhere because it grew well. It had no diseases, there's no insect pests, because they brought clean cutting, not because they wanted to, but by accident, because they were so long in a ship, probably down in salt water, that the wood survived, but whatever else may have been on it didn't make it. So it became sort of the staple at the time we started our project of 200 million people. From Senegal all the way to Mozambique, sort of the cassava belt across, which is an area roughly 2.5 times the United States. So it's a big area, the north and south of the equator. So these 200 million people all of a sudden found themselves in a big bind, a bit like the Irish when the potato blight came in, with the Cassava Mealybug have been found in the Congo, at the time was called Zaire, Congo, and also the Congo Brazzaville. From there, it was found first, and then it spread like a wildfire further into the Congo, across the continent, all in Mozambique, and or more to West Africa, along the coast first, and then inland as far as cassava is grown. Cassava being sort of the thing you bring to your friends, a little gift when you go and visit. So, oh, here, bring you the cuttings. These are really cuttings from very nice cassava, making big roots and all this. So there's a big exchange going on the seeds and on the cuttings, in particular for cassava. Again, because it's a very hardy crop, so people like it. Anyway, the mealybug came in.
And what would the mealybug do to the cassava?
So the mealybug multiplies on the cassava by aphids by sucking the sap. So they have a rostrum, they go inside the plant and suck the plant sap. And what happens is actually it's quite tricky because the mealybug has figured out one thing. It wants to protect itself from predators. So it injects a toxin into the plant which curls the leaves. So the leaves, everything becomes very curly and creates sort of a microhabitat where the mealybug are quite protected from predators. And by the fact that it injects this toxin, the plant stops growing. So instead of having big bushes, which are like, I don't know, up to 6-7 feet tall with many branches, you have a little stick like this, tall from the ground, with a white top. Just a bunch of mealybugs, female, who have a cocoon in which they put their eggs, again protected from predators. And they call it in French, they call it maladie de cierge, which means the candle disease. And people look at it, they call it a disease. Actually, if you look very carefully, you see it's insects. But at first glance, it looks like a white candle. So that's why it got that name. But the yield then is 0. And the worst is that you don't have a cutting to plant again because it's all dried up. And so that was a total disaster for the humid tropics. Again, putting a lot of people into famine mode. They tried alternative crops, like in Zaire, they went and tried corn, maize, but that didn't pan out because lack of water. They didn't have the right varieties anyway at that time and people wanted their cassava, what they call the pondu. They actually take the root and beat it, I don't know for how long, and make a paste. And you have to ferment it first to remove all the cyanide in the cassava, in the bitter one at least. There are 2 types of cassava, bitter and sweet. The sweet you can eat like a carrot. It grows mostly in the drier area, in the Sahelian zone, and on the East Africa coast. But in more moist area, you have the cassava which has cyanide, the bitter cassava, which needs careful processing. But again, as I said, it's the staple of 200 million people. And today, that was like when I joined 1980, early 80s, there were 200 million people. Today is more than double. And so lucky cassava is still around.
Okay, so you were brought in and you were told, we have a problem. Can you fix it?
Yeah, that's right. So they said, we have this cassava which is disappearing. It's most probably, because nobody knew at the time where this insect came from, probably an invader from somewhere. Very soon, the taxonomists, and that was Dr. Mathilde Ferrero at the museum in Paris, got some sample from the French colleagues, entomologist in Brazzaville, and she described it as a new species together with the mealybug specialist at the British Museum in London. There were these 2 people in the world who spent their life looking at mealybugs on slides. And they described it as Phenacoccus manihoti. And so that the new species to science.
So as far as science knew, there were mealybugs, but this was the first mealybug like this, and this is the one that was devastating the crop.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only clue we had that this is not from Africa is that the closest other mealybug ever found and described, which was a Phenacoccus species, came from the Americas, New World. It's a New World. And so the taxonomists told us, this is not from Africa, this is from the New World. All right, so where? Nobody had seen it either. We knew there were the close relatives were found on plants in Suriname, and basically sort of in the Caribbean. There were some records of mealybugs which were sort of in the Phenacoccus family. And so that's why the first steps of the people who started with looking at where is it coming from, is there any natural enemies, they were searching around the Caribbean, Suriname, the Guyanas, and so that area, mostly on bougainvillea. So they thought it was actually on a flower, on an ornamental plant, which could have been because people do carry ornamental plants all over the place. But it turns out that whatever they thought was eventually the Cassava Mealybug was not. It turned out to be Phenacoccus herreni, Herren, because I found out that this mealybug, which they thought is the same as in Africa, is actually a different species altogether. And so we basically, that team, they stopped their work because they were on a wrong track. In the meantime, I got in, put up a team, and we then went on maybe a bit more scientifically. We looked, okay, where are the area of origin of cassava? What is the science? What is known from insect pests, both on the cultivated and maybe on ornamental plants, because people go out and look at things, right? So they may have found something. So we searched the literature. I went to, I don't know how many museums where they keep slides of mealybugs, quite often not even identified. In particular, I spent a lot of time in Washington at USDA quarantine labs, because they have huge amount of insects which they got from people carrying plants around, forbidden, right? But they confiscate the material and get identified or non-identified. So I was looking through cabinet fulls of those slides to see, has anyone found this somewhere, and tried to bring it to the US. So that was one way, but anyway, there was nothing there. There were many Phenacoccus species from all kinds of plants, but nothing on a manihot family plant, because we knew it was very specific, and nothing basically from cultivated or wild manihot species.
And you were doing all this work without the benefit of the internet. So just to say, this was at a time where you couldn't just send an email and say, send me a picture.
No, nothing. You had to go. And you get permission. And it was quite complicated at a time, to go and spend some days looking at slides. Getting information took weeks, if not months. I mean, all the specialists, they usually then made an appointment and went to see them in Paris, in London, in Washington, in many museums, in different places, to look at their material, because you had to go in persona. Some of them would send you some samples, but again, nobody wanted to send anything to Africa or Nigeria, because all these insect samples were very valuable. So if they get lost, then it's lost, okay? A lot of the insects which actually were given names, so they are kept like it's I don't know, like a treasure.
Yeah.
And that's why, when some museum like in Brazil burned down, they lost so many materials, for example, biological material, which you cannot recover. Because with insects, like with plants, if you have a question about the species, you have to go back to the original individual used for the determination.
Yeah.
For the identification of the insect. Like how many hair on the leg, for example.
Yeah.
That it comes from one specimen, and that specimen is really a treasure. So very important. So that's what I was doing, going around looking at it.
So as this story develops, one of the things that's interesting is that this knowledge of this fine-tuned entomology, of this detailed, the difference between this mealybug species and that mealybug species, has an enormous practical impact. This is not just academics filing things because nothing wrong with that, like studying the world and going, look at that, this fish has, an extra gill. But this was millions of people in danger of starving to death if this wasn't figured out. Yeah. So how did you take it out of the museums and the experts and go out and look for this
Yeah,
insect.
so getting a bit frustrated. So where is this thing coming from? Really, like the fact that cassava has been studied for even back then over 50 years in all those national research organizations in Brazil, in Colombia, in Paraguay, like all over the place, right? There have been people studying, doing breeding and all this, having fields, and the fact that no one had collected that particular insect and give it a name or send it somewhere to give it a name. So basically it was unknown to science until it was found multiplying like crazy in Africa, where it didn't have any natural
enemies.
And what I decided to do is to figure out, all right, if no scientist working with cassava has seen this thing, then it must be on the wild one. Because we knew in the meantime that that insect will multiply only on manihot, on cassava. You can put it on tomato, you can put it on anything else, nothing happens. We tried, 20 different plants, put it on it, nothing. So it was very specific, which means when we search for that insect, you have to look on manihot species of some sorts. So all the wild relatives. Turns out that there's one guy in Russia who had done a big study, wrote a whole book about the origin of manihot. And lucky, because if some other crops don't have this, but that one was just out of interest. I don't know why you did this, but so we had that book in which it was described all the wild relatives of cassava, which maybe there are a few more out there which nobody has seen yet, but there were many. In the hundreds were found, and so I started to look, okay, where are the center of origin? Because the theory says that if you go to the center of origin of a crop, you are likely to find the greatest diversity of those plants. And thought, well, if you have diversity of plants, you probably have the greatest diversity of insects who are living on it. And eventually the natural enemies, which I was interested in getting. I found 5. There were 5 sort of center of origin for manihot species. And I decided, all right, then let's go look. So I wrote a grant proposal, got the money, and off I went, starting in northern Mexico, Baja California, where a number of those wild species were described from. Further down, Central America, okay, go over the Darien Gap to South America, and again, Venezuela, Brazil, I went to Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia, all the way down to Paraguay. So these are basically the countries which I went through, zigzagging around, connecting with local partners in the ag research in every country, with international research centers like the one in Cali, Colombia, and trying to get some help. And I knew some Spanish and I knew some Portuguese to get around, but sometimes it's good to have somebody with you who actually can talk not only to the farmers, but to all the people who want to stop you on the road.
Yeah, you said it was a very volatile time politically in Central America.
Very volatile, yeah. There was war going on, civil war in El Salvador, Nicaragua, were still the Sandinista around all over the place. So I could hear, I was sleeping in my lab van vehicle, and they were shooting, you could hear the guns going off left and right. I was actually once told by a group, they came with a military truck. I said, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, well, you can see I'm spending the night. I said, you're crazy, you have to go to the town, you stay in town, don't stay out here, it's dangerous. Okay, yeah, I'm going. I thought it was safer to be out in the bush, but anyway, it wasn't.
It's the roadblocks that were the dangerous part, right?
Yeah, that was, when they come and put the gun between your in your back, then you think, or maybe I will cooperate with your demand to search the vehicle. But that was quite a dicey period. But again, it we managed somewhere, one way or another. And I was quite worried about having US license plate on my vehicle, actually from Arizona, because I registered it there. But the thing was that I wrote in big letters on the windows, Suizo. I thought, okay, this guy in there is actually from Switzerland, not from the US, because US was not very welcome in many countries, Central America. So I was trying to say, okay, and I put the Swiss flag and try to sort of make sure they don't mistake me for an American spy or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you did find the right mealy bug, and you did find the parasites.
So after more than a year of going around, center of origin number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and right in there. So actually it was right. It was one of the center of origin which actually was harboring that mealybug and the natural enemies. And so we searched widely around. So first was found in Paraguay in an ag research station. I want to note this now, because in Africa, it was also discovered in an ag research station. So eventually, you can put one and one together and then figure out what's going on. But at that time, no idea. So we just found it there. And then we set up a team at that research station in Paraguay first. And they really scouted the whole country for mealybugs and beneficial insects. And they had so few mealybugs and beneficials that they were actually putting out plants where they reared mealybugs on. They put them into the field to see what can they attract on it. And so we found the wasp, Epidonocarsis lopezi, which is the parasitoid wasp, which we then also found in Brazil and in Bolivia on cassava. So we moved the team eventually to Brazil because there was much more cassava grown there, and also because we wanted to get parasitoids from different ecological zones a little bit. So we collected the same parasitoids and some predators in 3 different locations, basically. So Bolivia, Paraguay, and Brazil. And we send them from there to a quarantine lab we established in the UK. So if anything goes wrong, they escape, because you can never guarantee the insect will stay inside. This is never think you have a really tight building, because somebody will open the door or make a mistake somewhere. So we went to the UK because even if they went out there, they would not survive the winter. And then we took cassava plants. We took the mealybug, which was found in Africa, to the quarantine lab, and we took only emerged adult of parasitoids and of predators, ladybugs of all sorts we found, and brought them to the quarantine lab and put them on the mealybug. So to try to leave behind the hyperparasites, leave behind maybe also diseases which could be carried on pupae and all this, trying to be as clean as possible. And so then we checked those parasitoids over generation. We tested them on not only that mealybug, Cassava mealybug, but we took other mealybugs from Africa, which were not a problem, but just to make sure that they're specific. Because what we were looking for is very specific natural enemies who will not spend their time going and all over the place, okay, mealybug over there, let's go get that one also. No, we wanted them to concentrate on the Cassava mealybug. And so we managed to find a few species, and it turns out, which is quite interesting, that in the end of the 15 natural enemies we took through quarantine and brought to Africa, only one established itself. From Dakar to Maputo, mountain up, mountain down, tropical rainforest, arid zone in the Sahel, the same wasp is the one who today still, so many years after we started this program. The first releases were done like in 85, I think 84, 85. It's been there since. And it adapted to these many different conditions. And I think what we did right at the time, weren't so sure, is that we had different ecotypes. And they were all mixed. So we had a very broad genetic pool. Because we kept bringing new material in and down. So, because the danger is that you have a very narrow genetic pool. If you just take a few parasites and then release them and that's it, that's not going to work. And because they cannot adapt to different conditions. So the ecotypes we've got and we created maybe have adapted and are controlling it. It's now been like, 40 years almost. They're still there, doing their job.
When you started to release them, you were dealing with a serious hunger crisis. I mean, this was a disaster, right?
It was hunger, yeah. I mean, people had to bring in food from all over the place. World Food Program and others. I mean, they, like in particular in the Bas-Zaire or the Bas-Congo today, and into the Congo Basin, where people were so relying on cassava, that where the first wave got in, was really critical. And in other places, again, people switched over to yam where they could, started more and more maybe planting sweet potato, but they were longing for the cassava because that was the traditional, or it became, after so many years, the main traditional food. Yeah. And they just love it. I mean, that's what they want, in many different ways of preparing it. And so it was a problem for them to switch to something else. But it's amazing how fast. I mean, you release in one area, let's say in the drier season, because that's when there's a lot of mealybugs around. That's it. In the next season, the problem is gone.
Problem's gone.
It is, I mean, we could not believe our own eyes. Actually, when I remember, we went out and made the first release on it was called the Texaco farm. Texaco company made a huge mess with oil in what was called the Biafra, the Niger Delta. And then they were fined and they had to do something for the community. So what they did, they started this big, I don't know, probably 500 hectares of cassava with a factory to make starch and to make the gari, the product so they were trying to see, can we do that also on a more industrial scale? And on that farm, same problem, they clobbered everything, the mealybug came in, it clobbered the whole farm. And so we used that as a release place, one of the first on our campus in Ibadan. We did some releases, so yeah, it's working. So we went on that farm, and so we released on the farm. And then one day we said, all right, let's go check how far it went, north, south, east, and west. And so we go there in the morning, like 10 o'clock, go and walk. And then all of a sudden I say, hey, it's now about 5 o'clock, right? We better get back because like at 6 o'clock it's dark. And we walked and we kept finding this thing. We could not believe it. I said, what? How far has this thing gone? So every generation, this thing was going like several hundred meters, and they have a generation every 7 days. So you can see over a season how far this thing went.
Yeah.
And I wish we'd taken the car, but no, we thought, it was going to be like a few hundred meters, right? And so we wrote actually a good paper on this because I mean that was in the annals of biocontrol, never seen. That spread. So that's when we said, all right, we're going to do this now differently. We're going to make releases from the air, and we choose, dropping points every few kilometers. And wherever we made these drops, the year we made the drop was the last year they had a problem. And I mean, I'm totally flabbergasted on this thing. I think it's the speed of spread of that wasp, mind-boggling. So we started to do a lot of very detailed research, trying to understand behavioral research. So we had a field of 100 meter by 100 meter. And then we put mealybugs on a plant in one corner, released the bugs in the other corner diagonally. It took only 2 days to find the wasps at the other end. they found these mealybugs, like 3, okay, on a plant. The capacity of discovery, of smell, it's quite something. I mean, we were all, and so that I don't know how many PhD we produced studying the biology of the wasp, of the mealybug. So it's probably one of the best documented biocontrol program, because usually people didn't have the money or the capacity. Like we really had the capacity to do things in a very different way and show that biocontrol actually works. It works from the biological side of things. We knew that there were other examples for biocontrol that work quite well. But I think what we added to it is that we can do this on a fairly large scale, continental scale, within a very reasonable budget, and again, it works for forever. So in the very end, we spent $20 million. And according to a study, which we're not part of, we saved 20 million lives. $1 per life. Now, you can't duplicate this. And actually, it's even less. It's only 50 cents, because by now it has even had a very much bigger return on that small investment. And it's interesting because at the very beginning, when I started this and I looked at it, I went to a donors meeting in Rome, and I showed them a few maps about Africa, how big it is, the cassava belt, and guesstimate how much money I need. I said, yeah, I need about $30 million over 10 years, and I would solve the problem. People laughed. The American representative told me in the meeting, officially, it's already even on a tape somewhere, that I'm a megalomaniac. I said, excuse me, Mr. Freeman was his name. When you have a little fruit fly problem in California, which is like a dust speck on that slide from Africa, you spend $250 million in a year. Now I know it's well spent money to control the fruit flies over here, but don't tell me I'm a megalomaniac if I ask for $30 million to solve a problem on a scale which is immense compared to what you would do in California. Yeah. We never got a penny from the US government, from USAID for this program.
So did your success change the trajectory of biocontrol for a way of controlling insects in agriculture?
Unfortunately, what happened is that by the time we were done with this project, it was like early 90s, what came into the picture? Biotechnology. So just at the moment when actually we had one good example, the Mealy Bug, but then we had the cassava green mite, which was continental. We solved it even in fewer years by going on the back of the Cassava Mealybug. We never got a lot of money for the green mite, but I used the money creatively to do green mite work at the same time I did mealybug work. I said, okay, you guys don't want to pay me, because the donors got fed up after a while, because it took us a long time, 5-6 years, to find a good predator. And then the donors were always saying, he's not working, you guys. So I said, I know we're going to get it. So I figured a way of doing it, to funding. Anyway, it became a very big success. And then we did mango mealybug. We did water hyacinth biocontrol. So we started a number of biocontrol programs, training people in all these 24 countries we were active in biocontrol. So they all had their own little projects. But they were totally outnumbered by the funding coming into the National Research Organization for Biotechnology. So the biotech was promising to solve all the problems very quickly, right? Why do you bother with multiplying a parasitoid when you can just put a gene into cassava to make it resistant to the mealybug, right? You'll be crazy, right? And so we saw money diverted, almost everything from biocontrol right over. Also in these international ag research institutes, money went just the other way. more breeding, which was their thing anyway, but breeding helped with biotechnology, bioinformatics. So everything went away from the biological, traditional, natural way. Because people realized also very quickly that with biocontrol you can't really make any money. If it works, it works. You don't have to do more things afterwards. It's a bit different if you lose entomopathogens, what I mentioned before on locusts. There you have to actually have an industry producing a pathogen which you can use, apply every time there's a problem. In greenhouses, you have to put in natural enemies all the time. So this is augmentative biocontrol versus the classical biocontrol where you do it once and then it works. So there are different ways, but it's never going to be at the scale of what the industry is doing with pesticides, for example, or the seed industry is doing today with GMOs. I mean, these numbers are huge. And so there's no way that you could generate that type of revenues for any companies doing biocontrol, even augmentative. So
let me ask you a question, just to give the devil their due, or at least ask this question. Is the biotechnology successful at solving problems?
No, I'm yet to see a single example where a problem has been solved permanently with a return rate of $1 in, 242 out, discounted over 20 years. No, because with pesticides, as we know, it's the same with the fertilizer actually, you have to do more and more and more. And when that more and more doesn't work anymore, you have to find another product, usually more expensive, and then you start the same cycle again. So no, it cannot be a solution. It is actually a treadmill where you get in and you never come out. And this has been shown many times. And about technology, and I remember I went to a meeting in Vail, Colorado. It was like in the late 80s when they started with this biotech stuff. And they promised, we're going to solve all the problems. And they were talking about the Bt gene already way back then. And then they were talking, a couple of years later, there was another meeting in Bern. I remember that, at the Botanical Garden. There were people from Syngenta, no, it was called Novartis at that time. Bayer, and there were people from ICI in the UK. There were a lot of people from the chemical industry. And what they were playing around with at that time then was resistance to herbicides, because they say, look, we need to get rid of this drudgery of weeds, and so we can actually make the plant tolerant to herbicides. Just like we make them resistant to insects. And I remember I presented a paper there. The paper is actually, I have a copy somewhere. And I said, look, you guys, you're totally wrong. What you do here now is exactly the same thing as we did with the pesticide topical application. What's going to happen is resistance. You're going to run out of your Bt genes eventually. Okay, maybe you can create new ones. Okay. But then you have to put them into the plant. Then the weeds will become resistant. I mentioned this is there, it's written there, okay? Way before anyone was even thinking of it. You're going to have resistance. It's nature. These plants want to live. So we can spread them. One seed out of 100,000, which some of these plants make, will make it. And then what? Oh, they laughed at me. I mean, they were laughing down there in the room. Okay, you laugh at me. We'll see who is laughing last. So what's happening today? Stacking, right? How many genes are they stacking already? How many resistant weed do we have out there which don't know what to do? They have to go now hand weed. You should see it down in the valley here, how they did these crews of 20 people hand weeding. Because you can't spread them that anymore. So this is all, I mean, we can see that. We know this is happening or would be happening, but we are laughed at and they said, don't worry, we'll find a solution. It's like sort of in the Reagan time, so don't worry, technology will fix it. We make a mess, we'll find the technology to sort it out. The fact that that technology will create its own problem eventually, don't worry, next generation, right? I mean, somebody else will deal with it. And that's where we are today, And instead of having done real serious work in integrated pest management, even if you had to use a few pesticides here and there, but if they had been used in a way like according to IPM strategy or philosophy, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. We would not use that many because we would have figured out ways of actually going away from this pesticide, because IPM is not using as little pesticide as you can, is actually not using any at all by doing the right agronomic practices, using the right varieties in the right environment, and then only then, if you have still a problem here and there, punctual application, not broadcast as it's done today. But that was never done because the industry co-opted IPM and made it, let's find thresholds. The thresholds became so low that when you go on the field and count, you're always going to read the threshold where you have to spray. Yeah. So the industry, so you see, and that's why if you leave the industry doing what they do, you're never going to win the battle. It's impossible because they want to sell their stuff. That's the capitalistic system we are in. Okay, that's what it is. And they're not going to go and put themselves out of business. So we have to find other ways to put them out of business, because in the end, we don't need them. Because we know how to solve the problem. We have solved so many problems in a natural way that they are redundant. But go tell them that,
Okay. So before we close, let's just talk about what we can do. We were talking about that earlier, and that's a question that every well-meaning person who has some awareness of this, they don't know what to do. So you've had a life of action. I mean, you've demonstrated that people can have a huge impact with some commitment and some fire and some intelligence and some luck, to get the opportunity to put all that together. What are your suggestions for things of somebody listens to you and they say, you're right, this is wrong, we've got to change how food is grown, and we are up against forces that are so massive. So what does a citizen do? Where do they start? I don't mean to ask this like, well, yeah, you have to have the answer, but what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, sort of, what do we do now? We, on the one hand, and even I was this morning on a board meeting with my foundation, we're looking at a number of projects, and again, looking at agroecology. We all say that we need to take a systems approach. And in the food system, agroecology, I think, is the best representation of all the different levels, from the field all the way to the people, to the consumers, and actually with the return loop. And so I think if we start to look to become holistic in our thinking, I think we can get there. And we showed it. There's so many examples. So it's not so that we have to actually demonstrate even one more time that an alternative to the present system works. So we know that. But how do we actually get it into the system? How do we get people? And again, an example, I think, which I came to believe in and I was pushing for it, what we did, again, in Switzerland. It's a small country, you can do things fairly easily there. So we got the citizens much more involved. Because if you work with the farmers have a lot of constraints. And they're not going to say, okay, tomorrow I'll do agroecology, because they worry about surviving, right? I mean, it's all marginal. Almost everywhere agriculture is marginal. They need subsidies in order to make it all this. So they are not very entrepreneurial. Or they're not taking, they don't take too many risks unless the risks are covered. So you need government support to make that change. And the government has to guarantee to the farmers that if they move on to agroecological practices, organic agriculture, which is the mainstay basically from the field part in food production, animal production, ranching, that if you make that change, will guarantee that if things are slow in coming and transforming, that will help you. But the government won't do anything on its own unless it's been pushed by somebody. The farmer can push, but again, not every farmer is sold to agroecology. So why don't we go on the other end, we go to the consumers. And so what we did is, okay, let's see if we can get people's input into the Swiss Farm Bill, which was just redone a few months ago. And so last year what we did, we randomly selected 80 citizens, totally random. There were people from all creed and backgrounds and God knows, they have a system to choose random people. In a very interesting way of doing that. And then they got them together and said, okay, the question to you is, what kind of food system would you like to see in 2050, looking forward? And then many of them say, what is the food system? Did you say we had a spectrum? Okay. So we had then to organize, we didn't think of this at the beginning, organize workshops with people from the industry so that they explain what they are doing, the whole retail. So we had all the major supermarkets, people presenting, okay, how does that work? From when they buy until they sell. We had people from nutrition. We had farmers, organic farmers, conventional farmers. So people came, and also we had decision makers, policy makers, to explain how they make food policies and all this. So we spent probably 2 or 3 months in workshops with these 80 people to educate them about the food system. And we have never thought that in Switzerland people can be so ignorant, but they are. You go down the street here, ask people food system. Why do we have to do that, right? I mean, all right, so we fixed that problem. And then they organized sort of tables and asked different questions. Okay, what kind of policies or what would you like to see? We came up with, I think, 120 ideas, which were packaged very nicely, submitted to the president of Switzerland, which rotates every year, is a different president, and among the 7 ministers we have. And there was an official handing over of this people's wishes for the food system. And then he passed this on to Parliament, and they debated this in Parliament. Official discussion, so get the citizen involved. And I think that you cannot change things unless you have more citizens educated about what we're trying to do and what is needed, climate change, right? I mean, all these other things were discussed in great detail. And so we really tried to get Parliament, the parliamentarian, pushed by their constituents to actually make sure the Farm Bill will integrate the wishes of the people. Again, that was the first time we did something like this. And I know that actually the Farm Bill is now, I think, gone through. I'm not sure if it's officially passed or not. But quite a number of those ideas have been taken up. So I think what we need really to get agroecology going is not only talking to the farmers. I think we need to go talk to the people, to the masses. And they have to understand what is at stake for themselves, for their children, because in the end, the environmental damage we're making, the health damage we're causing ourselves, health costs out of control, climate costs out of control. So how are we going to solve all this if people do not really understand what we're talking about? And then go and elect people into decision-making positions who can actually then make the right policy. Okay, what kind of agriculture do we support? What do we subsidize and what we don't subsidize? how do we help the farmer with our ag research system, which has to be totally overhauled to answer the questions the farmers have, not the industry asking the research center to test product A, B, C, D. And so you can see, I think we need, again, a whole different approach to pushing, to have the right decision, political decision made. You can do a lot without that, but eventually you reach, and I think we have reached the point where we need much more fast, decisive action. And that can no longer come just from through NGOs to work in the ground up. That's too slow because we are frying. I mean, the hottest summer on record, global. Okay. Are we really putting all the efforts in it? We're still evading the basic question. We're trying to find a solution to the symptoms, not the cause. And the cause of our problems, food system, as you know, is big. Our whole energy system needs overhaul, which is very much connected to agriculture, as we know, right? There's a lot of connection there. So there has to be a lot of changes happening. And I think we need to educate our citizens much better, because that's from where I think change can come. But hey, we don't want to go back to primary school. No, we need to get the people now. So the new generation, the generation Z, is that the latest? Or G, I don't know which one is the youth who actually got Montana, state of Montana to move. So these are the ones, I think, who need to be supported, also educated somehow, still more, to understand really exactly what they see, and help them become decision makers. They have to start to take those positions where decisions are being made. And the old guys like myself, we need to get out of the way. We're there to help them if they want some help. But I think we need to sort of try to move out and help where we can, where we see opportunities. And I hope that this group in Montana would be helped and that get duplicated in many places. Like in the Netherlands, it happened there before. I think in Europe, in a few places, in Sweden, I think they also have done something like this. So we need a whole lot more of it. But the way we tackled this in Switzerland through my foundation and a few other people was that we tried to get the cross-section of the citizens. There are all ages were there also represented. And I think they came up with really some interesting solutions. Actually, they're all on the BioVision website. And I think they will be useful example for other countries to look at and find a way to adapt that to their local conditions. Like you cannot do exactly the same thing because we have a system with two chambers, actually, just like the US. The parliamentarians and like the senators and the Congress people, yeah, same thing. I think it shows that if we promote the democracy in that system, I think we go somewhere. And we stop listening to the industry because their interests are very narrow, way too narrow. Short-term benefit. And they don't seem to be affected by this. Very strange. They have family, right? Most of them. Yeah. I'm quite surprised. But let's help them also, And, I know that I tried the dialogue with a number of industries. I stopped because I felt that it's wasting my time because it's like Teflon. You talk to them, nothing sticks. They would tell you, oh, Hans, yeah, we agree totally. Yeah, we need to change. We need a new system. But we're not talking about the same system.
Yeah.
And
we start by talking with the people who listen, and it will grow.
It will grow. But again, will it grow fast enough?
Yeah.
Again, Greenland, South Pole, ice sheet going. I mean, things are happening much faster than we think, and that's what I think should worry people. I mean, look here in California. All right, they have too much water, then we have not enough water. We have the mega fires in Canada, mega fires in many different places, and the Hawaii one is industrial agriculture. Who is the culprit there in the end? Who removed all the natural vegetation to have big plantation? And then abandon them because it's no longer making money. So the same thing will happen here too. People will say, it's not worth it. All right, the forests are gone, the forests which actually were also barrier to fire, right, if they are managed properly. Yeah, we are exposing ourselves to a whole lot more trouble.
All right. Hans-Herren, thank you very much. It's time for dinner.
Okay, yeah, welcome.
Okay.
Welcome, Dave.
Right.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.